welcome to This Side Up. I'm so thrilled that we're all here together. I think it makes a lot of sense that the artists here are sitting in front of the mount making installation, because this exhibition is really about celebrating the labor, skill, and craftsmanship that happens behind the scenes. And mounts are typically not only, attached to points that are unseen for viewers in galleries, so they're rarely seen by anyone. They're also meant to be invisible. And so it's that kind of invisible labor that the exhibition is really trying to suss out and also assert that it is within this discipline of craft framework. We've had a freeze, some thunderstorms, but I think it actually is all really makes sense, because every exhibition comes with unseen hurdles, and it's the art handlers who are always picking up the pieces, figuring out how to display works of art that nobody, not even the artist, knows how to display sometimes. So I think it's all of that kind of unseen labor that happens that we're really celebrating here today. So I'm so thrilled and honored to introduce 4 visiting artists who are here with us today from all over the world. Starting from the right, we have Vivian Chu, whose incredible work in the front gallery has traveled all the way from Hong Kong to Chinatown, New York, and then here to Houston. So there's been a lot of miles between all of the vessels that you've made, and Vivian coming from Hong Kong to Richmond to here. So thank you for being here, Vivian. Then we have Adam John Manley, whose crates of kind of hyper-specific behind-the-scenes objects you also walked through to get into this space. And Adam's traveled here from San Diego. Welcome. And we have Willem de Haan, who I think made the furthest journey from Brussels and has been here with us for 2 weeks making site-specific installations. And then we have Clinton Lowry, who has come here from Brooklyn and has reprinted 2 of the first issues of Art Handler magazine and is presenting sculptural work in the space with us. So welcome to all the artists. So I wanted to start out by passing it along, and maybe you could each just introduce kind of what your practice is and what you have on view in the show.
Okay, I'm Clinton Lowry, and I was excited to be in the show because, I started Art Handler magazine. I started working on it exactly 10 years ago, and I came to the project as an artist, but then quickly I became editor, admin, a number of things, because I never worked on a magazine, so I was just trying it out on the fly. And so my practice is kind of all across the board, I think, because doing the magazine, there's so many things that I kind of, the way I look at it, I look at a lot of things creatively when I do it, but if I talk to anyone else about what I'm doing, it's just mostly admin. So, so this is a great opportunity to kind of show some of the sculpture work that I made before the magazine. So I guess you could say I'm a sculptor, and I also make videos. But a lot of those ideas have been integrated through the project, through the magazine, and as well as the Instagram and even JobSite Art platform. A lot of the same thinking is there in terms of providing a resource for the art world. That's about it for me.
Okay, cool.
That's cool. Oh yeah, I'm not.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Willem. I'm usually working on site-specific pieces. A lot of them take place in public space. Actually, I was invited to show in galleries maybe after working in public space for about 2 years, and I had some trouble translating my work to these indoor white cubes until I also tried to use the same working method, so really making pieces that only could exist within these white cubes and reflecting on this context, similar to how I try to reflect on the locations that I work with that are outdoors, that are often places where there are interesting, like, local challenges going on, ranging from floods, which is actually a very local theme here as well, or farmland that's under pressure, or I don't know what else, like neighborhoods that are completely being, like entire cities being built new next to historical cities in Europe. That's like the usual context I work with, and I try to like kind of challenge the way these contexts are perceived by the installations that I'm making for them. And over the last few years, I try to do the same within the context we're sitting now, which I think is challenged very well with this exhibition.
Thank you. I'm Adam Manley. I teach furniture design and woodworking at San Diego State University, which is a program that's pretty rooted in traditional craft of furniture making, and I myself sort of use those techniques more towards making sculptural work for the most part. The work that I have here is kind of part of a long evolution in my practice, which started from just needing to make very functional crates for work that's large and awkward, and how I kind of fell in love with it, and also then started making the crate more part of the work slowly but surely. And my work generally has been sort of dealt with, I have an obsession with functional objects, and especially like the kind of meaning that they carry with them, and how they can hold this history in them, and their meanings can shift over time. And so I've sort of, in my practice, I kind of link those objects to a sense of place and time and history as much as in different ways. And I tend to work in these kind of projects that are like a year long or more sometimes, but I like to kind of think up an idea like this crate project that Sarah was very helpful actually with throughout the whole process, and work through that for several months or a year, and then move on to another project. And so my work has been, the crate has been important to my work in many different ways recently.
Everyone, again, I'm Vivian Chu. Thank you for those who've been here the last few days. I feel like you're going to hear me say the same thing over and over again, but the work I have in the front room, the series is titled Passages, Those That Carried Us. And the project came about because Wing On Wo, which is the oldest general store in Chinatown, New York, they're now headed by the 5th generation owner. They contacted me because they have all these crates in storage, and the way they have these crates is her grandparents and great-grandparents used to go to Asia and Hong Kong to source porcelainware to then ship to New York to then sell. So they've kept these crates since the 50s, and they contacted me saying that, you know, we have these really sentimental objects, we haven't thrown them away in so long, but we really need to get rid of them. Can you do something with them? And so I said, give them all to me, I'll figure it out. And I really connected with not only their story of being immigrants from Hong Kong, but also the crates story of being from Hong Kong. And so my idea was to transform the crates into the objects that they would have carried, and using existing objects that they currently sell in their store, as well as objects from the Met archives and classic Chinese porcelainware shapes to create these forms while trying to preserve as much of the stamping and marks as possible, and really trying to pay homage to not only the people that created the crates and the labor that goes into transportation, but the idea of protecting something while being in transportation and paying homage to our families that have really bore the brunt of having migrated or translocated. And one of the pieces I enjoy the most is the bowl with the nails, where I kept all the nails from all the panels that I've been taking apart, to really highlight just the cultural heritage and the preservation that I'm trying to do with the series. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think a nice way to start is to kind of think about the creative reuse, like you're talking about, transforming a container, a specialized container, into the objects that they once carried or will own, the kind of creative rethinking of like the most common tool that you use during installation, tape measure into a kind of a curtain. Could you talk a little bit about some of the skills that you have gleaned from being in these kinds of behind-the-scenes spaces, or having, facing challenges installing your own work, that have kind of led to these bodies of work?
No, I think it's interesting. Many of these pieces that I contributed to this show indeed come from small realizations that occurred during, like, installing my own works in exhibitions, or even earlier in the process in the studio. And actually, when you're like thinking about these like daily themes and you try to kind of show them in a new perspective, you automatically start to look at your own surrounding, which maybe is not everyone's daily surrounding, but it's like the studio space, or a challenge like transporting your work, making sure it fits through the door of the place where you're showing it, and all these kind of continuous challenges that you run into doing your job. You also try to deal with them in the same maybe creative or absurdist way that you try to approach your subjects. So, for example, when Sarah invited me here, we discussed a couple of pieces to show here, and I already realized from the start that it was going to be quite a challenge to ship everything that we had in mind from Brussels here to Houston, and then like this international shipping is something that I also would like to include as a theme in my work. So the suitcases that are kind of like that you're surrounding at the moment, they're a piece that I made specifically for the show to travel here. They're like the dimensions of the baggage allowance of British Airways. It's actually first we had to book the flight just to check which airway I would fly here with and what the exact rules were of the airway. Checking these in Brussels, it was quite a like theater play already. Like they didn't know what to do with them. Like people were kind of suspicious of what I was transporting. It's not like the common thing. But I was like, I read the rules. These should be perfectly fine. It's the type of wood that can be imported here. It's exactly the dimensions. It's exactly within the weight. But then these like typical crates that I would usually transport the work in, like do a really small edit, adding the handles and the wheels to them to make them kind of fit in with this, like just a tourist trip to Houston and trying to bring my works here this way. So I feel like there are all these like parts of, I don't know, this is just an example, but there are always these parts of working as an artist, taking care of your own work or helping out friends doing their exhibitions. They're like moments that become so common to yourself that as you try to find interesting ways to show life around you, then transporting a work also becomes like, it kind of enters this domain, and after a few years you start to play around with those elements as well. I guess Vivian must have a really nice alternative example of how this working method turns out.
Well, I mean, I think this was the first exhibition where all of us were also helping with installation because we all have prior fabrication or art handling experience, which is pretty rare in putting an exhibition. But the question was about crates.
And could you specifically talk about the kind of nimble problem solving that you had to come up with in transforming the crates? Vivian kind of invented her own technique to be able to make the wood conform to those shapes.
Yeah, so when I got these crates, they've been stored since the 50s, so we don't even know when they were made, let alone how old the wood is. So when I got the wood, some of it was rotten, a lot of it was cracked, there were different thicknesses, different widths, and they were really made up of the worst leftover material that was slapped together. If you look at some of the crates, some of them are made from different crates, and it was just really hard to work with because it's pine, which is what we would see as like 2x4s. So this was old, terrible, rotten pine. So to get those forms, I realized I can't do the traditional methods of woodworking to get a bend. I couldn't steam them. I couldn't kerf bend them, which is doing tiny slices and then sort of bending them. So I had to figure out how to basically cut them into little tiny pieces. When you think of an Excel spreadsheet, I basically cut them into columns and then cut them into rows so that I have just an entire grid of different angles. Then I glued together and then coopered them and then wrapped them around. And a lot of them aren't super perfectly round or flat. And I thought for 1 second to maybe clean them up and make them look, really perfect. But someone said that if you're trying so hard to preserve the labor of the people who made the crates, why would you spend time to erase your own labor? So I kept a lot of the glue, I kept a lot of the pencil markings to sort of add my name to the story of the crates and the objects. So.
And Adam, you talk a little bit about the acquisition process that we had and just the kind of process of building this body of work and this kind of meta collection of objects.
Yeah, so these works, so each of those crates houses either an object or a collection of objects that are from either the custodial or preparator or conservators' labs in various museums and institutions that have craft collections or are important in the craft and design world. And as a person who's sort of obsessed with tools but also obsessed with objects and the histories that come with them, the idea was sort of to create a new collection, thinking of what objects in history carry what we think of as value, as collectibles, as art objects, or as artifacts of some kind. And so we started reaching out to these institutions. We made a really long list and reached out to a lot of people, and a handful of people were very excited about it. And so they would send us these things from these workshops, basically. So one of the really interesting ones that I like to point out is that if you've seen the one with the 4 tape measures in it, those 4 tape measures, we reached out to the Cooper Hewitt in New York, and they were excited to send us these specific objects because there's a man named Matthew, I'm forgetting Matthew's last name, Matthew Weaver. Okay, so the tape measures are the example I like to use because not all of those objects came with very specific information about the user. They were something that gets used in in these shops and has been used by generations of people. But Matthew Weaver at the Cooper Hewitt had been the chief, I think, preparator for about 40 years. And the way they describe it is this person sort of held much of the institutional knowledge of all the spaces there. And closer. And apparently when he would get a new tape measure, he would cover it in paint so that so he knew which one was his. And Matthew retired just before we reached out to them, and they sent us all of his tape measures that he had left behind when he retired after 40 years there. So to me, tools I love old tools partially because I love thinking about the people who use them and the sort of histories that come with them. And so that object, I relate these crates really to reliquaries and thinking about the importance of objects in our lives and how we preserve them and also elevate them through potentially like housing them in very specific boxes. So I make reliquaries a lot, and I love the idea of the crate serving as a kind of reliquary for these generally overlooked objects and these people who put so much labor into our experience in a gallery but we don't really know about. There was another thing I was thinking about, also the question you asked about like what I've gleaned from like art handling experience in the past and through this project. And I was thinking this morning about, I've been involved in putting exhibitions together. Calling myself a curator is not, I don't do that, but like I've been getting more involved in putting exhibitions together, and receiving work that's created really badly is really terrible. And so when you get this great crate to come in and everything is carefully laid out and it comes apart easily and you know how to put it back in. So in a way, these crates also serve as a kind of fantasy for me of like what I would like to receive, and thinking about the people who have to open this stuff on the other end, and the idea that they can just like take a wrench and pull the top off. And each thing has a place it goes and nothing else fits there. So I was in a way kind of like trying to think of like doing a service to the people on the other end of receiving this stuff, because I am sometimes on that end of things. And I also in the past have built a lot of crates that are like, they're built overnight because the work has to ship the next day, and they're screwed together roughly, and I'll send it out the door and be like, sorry. And so the idea that this thing is like my ideal vision of what I would like to receive on the other end if I were a art handler or installing exhibitions somewhere. That's kind of something that I learned in that process. Do I send you this too?
Yeah. I think you're touching on some really interesting elements of the kind of relational and networked kind of methodologies that come into play when you're building an exhibition or mounting works of art for display. And I think there's kind of a nice analog between that networked system and kind of process and the process of finding art handlers. It's a very relational and kind of networked group of people, and everyone has these really specialized skill sets. So oftentimes when I have an exhibition coming up, I will, reach out to the art handling community and say, there's an entire 60-foot wall of vinyl. Who's the best person to do this? And there are certain art handlers who say, I'm not the right person for that. But who's the best vinyl installer in Houston? X. So a lot of the kind of, even in the making of this exhibition, there's been this kind of networked quality to it. I found Willem's work through Clinton's magazine and social media project, Adam and I met up at a conference, and then Vivian and I had a conversation at the conference that led to her talking about this upcycled crate project that she was working on. So there's all these kind of synergetic, relational, kind of networked stories behind exhibition building. I'd love it if you could talk about how that relates to each of your practices. And maybe we could start with you, Clinton, because I think that your work has really served as this kind of nexus point for art workers kind of globally, and how you're kind of bringing people together in that way.
Okay, that's yours. Okay, all right, so talk about how like art.
Talk about your project a bit.
Okay. All right, let's see. Let me try to tie that together. Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't work in this format so much. So like exhibition making, other than like either as an art handler or somehow adjacent. But in terms of the project, in terms of art handler, like the magazine or the Instagram, I've definitely like received like so many messages, from like big galleries especially, and they've asked me like personally, like, oh, can you connect me with art handlers in Vancouver or something, like, or anywhere they're installing, especially like during fair season, like people get desperate, and that's when they reach out, so it's funny how an Instagram account and like an independent journal serves as this resource to a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think that's kind of pathetic, but also funny, but that's the world we're in. We're in like a word-of-mouth, industry. Like anybody, like the behind the scenes in the art world is really just people who work in the art world, of course you have the front of house, so it's like, during gallery hours or museum hours, you see people who are working, but you really don't see people working in the art world. It's always closed off. It's about the art. It's about the aura. It's like industrial magic is our game in a way. I had that ready a while back, industrial magic. But anyways, I guess all I'm trying to get at is with the project and kind of what we're doing is there is a big sense of just the industry and really bringing that conversation to the foreground. Like when you go to art school, when you read art journals, like dominant discussions around art, doesn't really, they don't really talk about the nitty gritty, like the hands-on, these kind of practical experiences, like with artworks being shipped to galleries and and all of the problems that that come out of it, or even all of like the experiences that come out of it that could be interesting, but it's really just about the artwork, and then every now and then the artist biography is tied in. So I think exciting thing with this show, exciting thing with our projects is really like a different kind of visibility around that experience, and this is a unique opportunity to like kind of provide density, I think, to these like different experiences. Like whether it's crate making or or it's around tools, and then like for my project it's it's really just about the stories, and I think just generally probably another big picture thing, if I could say one more thing, is just how like individuals within this space or groups within this space could actually like take a certain kind of agency on their own and not have these experiences be expropriated by like kind of big commercial entities. And like I even think of like your luggage, right? Like this is all like I've seen this type of luggage. I mean, not exactly, but like I could see, I don't know, like Prada or Burberry or something running campaigns and kind of doing these types of like editorials like around like our experiences. So I think us like kind of owning it is what's exciting about it.
You could say this show is a claim in that sense as well, where it's not hidden behind the scenes anymore, but where, it's like publicly owning it. I think, I don't know, to kind of connect to what you're saying, and these local networks where you're like kind of asked or people ask you to help them or to connect them. I'm happy to have had the chance to work here for 2 weeks on site. because of the shipping being a challenge, we found out for a few pieces it might be interesting to produce them on location, especially as these measuring tapes are such a big subject within the body of work that I'm showing here, which also look different back home from the inches and feet that you're using here. I thought it's a nice chance to adjust a few of these pieces. And one of the first challenges we came up to was the plan to hang this curtain, which is just 108 measuring tapes put next to each other, realizing this tool that you use, like I use every day, could also function in a completely different way. Being like, I don't know, maybe not the perfect curtain, but definitely giving like a new dimension or a new option to a curtain that you usually, like other curtains don't have, or it opens in a completely different way. You can take any shape out of it. So we wanted to show this piece here, and for that I needed a frame, like a welded steel frame, to hang all these measuring tapes. So through connections here at the Craft Center, we heard about Francisco, a guy all the way in North Houston, welding projects in the back of his metal shop. So on my first day I was at Rose Steel, like with a cardboard model of the piece, like the frame that I wanted to make, and trying to work with Francisco to get the frame done, which was a really nice process. And then later on, during the installing, there was another piece, which is the floor piece that we're all sitting on at the moment as well, which is based on an original drawing that I was sent early on in the exhibition process, like a quick hand-drawn version of what the exhibition setup would look like, how these walls were going to look. And we thought of framing the original drawing as well. We discussed a bit about the framing possibilities, and then it suddenly made sense to again go to Francisco to also ask him to weld the frame, because the frame over there for these measuring tapes is completely covered by the tapes, but then to also include his kind of practice or labor in a more visible way in the show. So on the back side of this wall, this white wall next to us, there's like the frame, which is also like made out of this raw metal, kind of giving more insight into the people or the different types of materials that are used to put this show together. The same with the frames over here, actually. That I forgot the name of the framer. Do you still know?
Yeah. Macon. Isn't his name? Mason.
Mason at HDX Frames. That's like we ordered the frames. They're showing pictures of the luggage while they were in use at the airport, and the suit that's hanging in the back, like while it's worn. So some images of these works like functioning outside of this gallery context as well. And then we received the frames, of course, packed with I don't know what this kind of wrap is called. And then actually my good friend and production assistant Dirk, who is also here in Houston, who's been here for the last few days to help out, he was super excited by the way they were wrapped. He was like, you should hang them just like this. Also showing, I don't know, maybe some intervention that Mason did that we didn't really like commission him to do, but of course, like every framer delivers their frames like this, and keeping these kind of touches visible within the show as well. So I feel like there's some like people locally here in Houston that I've worked with that I'm super happy to also kind of have their kind of additions or signature within the show, and we try to keep those elements visible.
I'm wondering, Adam, if I feel like that's a really, thank you, Willem, for talking about the kind of installation and mounting and display choices that you made, and how intentional they were to kind of reveal the labor of all of the people in the process. It's funny because we had a really incredible group of art handlers art handling the art handling show, which felt very meta. And some of them are here today, so I wanted to thank Ian and Iva Kinnaird and Tiffany Nesbitt, and there's just so many people. Patrick Renner helped us do framing. It's just been a really, every exhibition, I feel like you tend to just see curated by X, but you don't see the kind of massive league of people that that contribute, really specialized labor. And I wanted to ask Adam if he could talk a little bit about, if he could talk a little bit about his display choices, why you decided to display them not on pedestals or vitrines and that kind of really gallery vernacular. And could you talk a little bit about that process for you?
The long card. Yes. That was kind of, I feel like you're giving me too much credit for that. You and I had a conversation, and it evolved out of that conversation. Part of that is just like, I get bored with the kind of traditional, like, I don't think my work makes sense on pedestals often, and these in particular felt like they didn't want to be displayed on kind of white painted rectangles. Originally, they were going to be kind of shown more in like a pile, like sort of just like they had been dropped off and opened up, but not set up yet. I think that that conversation came out of like trying to preserve that feeling, like they had been kind of pulled out of storage or something like that, but also presented in a way where they're lifted off the floor and put on angles, and I sent you all these like different types of dollies that I've used in the past that would support them properly. You found the log cart, which was a good call. That's this sort of one with the two small ones there. And then also like the aesthetic connection of the sort of colors and that are happening in the crates, and their reference to tools and very functional utilitarian objects. So like it made sense that they would be supported on one of those things. I had also a thought about your last question, if you don't mind me. I'm like thinking about the network thing has been really important to me in my whole career, and Vivi and I were talking just the other day about like something that's really unique, I think, to the contemporary craft world is a sort of a sense of community that I don't see. It's not that it's not there, but I think there's more of a competitiveness that happens in kind of like, say, that the more traditional contemporary art world, and existing on this sort of line between craft and fine art that I have existed on has always been really satisfying, because like my craft community, we step up for one another, and I think it's really like one of the best things about being a part of this community is like we tend to kind of like band together in a way that I don't see often in other fields. Like I came up I actually went to San Diego State for graduate school also, and Wendy Mariyama ran that program. And like Wendy is a person who I think one of her biggest strengths was just connecting people to one another and creating like a cult almost that is sort of has really strong connections. And like coming into that program at the time is like, once I went through that, when I meet someone who went through that program, we're just friends. They'll try to get you into shows. They want to show your work. They want to connect you with someone else. And I find that in the whole field, kind of, and now as like a professor, I don't know if I'm like, am I mid-career? Is that a thing to say? I don't know where I'm at, but like I've established myself in this kind of role, and I see that as personally as a big part of my role is like I have these people who I'm like, I don't know if I'm teaching them how to make art, but I'm helping them make art somehow. But more than that, I'm like connecting them to a group of people and trying to help them find ways to get their work into the world. And I think that's like the most that's the best part of this community. I really love being in the crafts because I felt that support at every stage, and now like feeling like I can be giving it and like meeting these people who work like in or around or adjacent to that craft world. I feel like there's a connection that I don't see in other fields of support.
Can I talk about?
The kind of networks and relational
Yes.
elements of your work.
Networks and relational elements. I thought you would ask me that, so I just got the mic. So, yeah, it's been a very. The work that I made definitely was not a monologue. It was definitely a dialogue that I've been having with Mei Lum, who's the current owner of Wing on Woe, and she is one of the people that is part of a young generation of Asians in Chinatown, New York, trying to save Chinatown because it's been shrinking and they're trying to build a jail and all this stuff. And so every step of the way so her parents still work at the store. She is their boss. Her grandmother and her grandmother's sister, Paul and Betty, sit at the front of the store to greet people who come in. So they're just sort of there all the time, and sometimes they'll help unpack. But for her, it's really been a generational undertaking for her to take over the store. So I would text her and her dad, Gary Lum. I'd be like, I saw these barrel stools. Can you take a photo of me for me? Can you give me the measurements? What was that again? And they'd be like, oh, we really like this one. We really like that one. And so when I was making the barrel stools specifically, I was thinking of Betty and Paul because they actually sit next to these ceramic barrel stools that they sell at the store. So I was like, this is sort of for them. This whole project was really for them because I don't generally this is the first time I've made very representational or also vessels. I don't really make vessels. And so the whole part of the way was really paying homage to them, but also like really glad that they entrusted in me these very sentimental objects that have passed down for so many generations. And so I was telling someone, I like felt like Mulan, I was like cutting my hair. I like quit my job and I was like, I'm going to do this project so well. They had no idea what I was going to do at all. And so it was just something came behind me and was like, you are the vessel for this project. And I sort of, I'm still going to be continually working on them until I run out of the material, basically. Yeah.
Thanks. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of, we've been, during install, we've been talking a little bit about the traces of labor that stick to the object. And we're sitting kind of in the center, some of you over there are surrounding a Walid Beshti FedEx box, and that is it's a tempered glass box that was made to the proprietary dimensions of FedEx boxes, which they own those dimensions actually, which is very interesting. And the title of the piece changes every location it goes to. So it's now has Houston as kind of its record log on its as part of its title, and it's this contingent object, right? So the kind of the cracks in the piece show the record of its movement, and in a similar way that crates and their stamps and all of the shipping labels and your, the airport labels and that are on your suitcases. They kind of build this this surface up of all of the trace of that record of movement, and Willem, you were calling it almost like a patination, and I was wondering if you could talk about the kind of like surface and how it kind of builds up and traces the records of the object life and the people who steward it and handle it and care for it over time.
want to say something about this?
Oh, I thought
Clinton?
you were looking at Willem. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
if you want. Okay. The material traces?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, I mean, that was, yeah, like Beshti's work, my moving blanket, jacket, and sleeping bag. Those works were kind of similar in the sense it's like, all right, how do you know, like as artists, you work with images essentially, and so the idea was like, okay, how do I place this behind the scenes image, you know, these material traces, this index, etc. How do I like stamp that onto the work? And that was kind of what I did. I mean, it's just, you know, moving blankets are material used to wrap sculpture and furniture. I mean, I have a captive audience here. Probably most of you know about moving blankets. But when I started that project, it was like literally like a year before the magazine. Hardly anyone knew what the works were about. And so I kind of felt, because I was already so excited about these material conditions within the behind the scenes, like within art handling, on the truck, you know, crates, plastic, all of these like sort of like transitional spaces that had their own kind of character. I wanted to, you know, essentially like make work about that, but it always seemed kind of like the works I made just like seemed like allergic. Like the behind the scenes kind of just seemed like allergic to this like exhibition space. Like it seemed like antithetical to making objects. So in a way, like my material traces, like I just thought it was insufficient. You know, I didn't think that I can kind of get those stories out of, you know, this like moving blanket material, you know, within the gallery space, or with you like looking at the jacket. You might think like, oh, that's a cool bomber, or that's interesting, or what material is that? But at that point, maybe now, it's, you know, you can connect it to this space, but then it was really just, you know, it was a cool looking thing maybe, you know, or it was strange that it was a functional object within a gallery setting. So is that clear?
Yeah, but even the newsprint publication objects, you brought all of these runoffs and the printing plates and there's like all of these traces of labor along the way of even the printing, and we hadn't even talked about them, but you brought them with you, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that too.
Sure. Yeah. So the vitrine has the print runoffs from Linko Printing in Queens, and that's like the waste material before you get the good, you know, prints. And I mean, I thought they looked beautiful, and yeah, exactly. Like those are the instances where you're in these like transitional moments. You know, it's like it's not the finished product. It's not the thing that, you know, you're intending on displaying. They have their own character. So yeah, of course, like I fetishize that. I want to put a frame around it, But I guess just for me, just how my practice works, like once I got into this idea, I really never felt like the image itself was enough. So it's a great opportunity to show it, and I think having an image, you know, or like treating this like as an image, you know, it's a kind of it does give density. You could like think more about these spaces, but I don't know if I would devote the rest of my practice just to collecting like those kind of runoffs, you know. But I do like presenting it, if that's, you know, that answers it.
I feel like there's something awkward about the suitcases, but maybe also Walid Beshti's work, like now with the fence around it, that you know that the intention of the work was for it to be thrown around by FedEx, and once it enters the white cube, it has gets a fence around it again. And it's the same, like we were just setting up the chairs here. You're sitting like around these suitcases. When I picked them up here at the airport, like the checked baggage, I was super happy to see it collected some dents in it, and I felt like the way they were thrown around by the airport personnel was like part of the sculpting process in a way. Also the stickers they put on it. Indeed, like feeling like relating it to the patina of like these bronze sculptures that are like just outside in all kinds of weather, and it changes their look over time, which actually is like a nice aspect of the material. So for me, these are examples of pieces that kind of are alive, and they're shown in an exhibition that tries to show like the behind the scenes of this process. I feel like yesterday we quickly mentioned this already, or tried to mention it at the start of our opening of the exhibition. I feel like this exhibition tries to, or could be seen as an attempt to break the fourth wall within the context of the White Cube. I think the original mention of the fourth wall is like within theater, where the theater stage is surrounded by set pieces on three sides, and of course like the audience, which actually I don't know. I'm looking at at a nice example at the moment, then there's this imaginary fourth wall, which is the audience, and once you're like as an actor, you point yourself towards the audience. The audience is suddenly like outside of the fiction is broken for a second, and of course like the term also translates to cinema, where looking into the camera breaks this fourth wall. But I feel like the White Cube is like kind of our like art world set piece that we like is our fictional setting, which we present or work in, and because of this set piece we give these objects a certain value by putting them on a white wall, putting a spot onto it, a name tag next to it, and that's what's happening with the Beshti FedEx work with the fence around it. It's like kind of this art world set piece I don't know. It feels like there's this constant like back and forth between trying to look the audience right into the eyes, but then also, and again, adding these elements of art world fiction. This is not my native language. I'm stuck a bit. So I don't know. There's something, some strange tension there, and I felt it was like a weird moment seeing like the chairs being put around the work, and then like, oh no, some of them are too close, like we need more distance. Well, like last week they were being thrown around, and they'll be flown back with after the show back to Brussels again. So I don't know if maybe it wasn't your intention, but that's the way that I'm reading this show, as an attempt to break this fourth wall, to indeed like show the work that's behind the scenes, show the people that are part of this process, as if you're in theater and you see the people in the coulisses. What are they called? Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, behind the, bringing the, like moving the set pieces up and down, or and then it's interesting to see that we were all here during the installing. The aesthetics of the show looks like installing. The show looked finished already 2 weeks ago, when there were like pieces of tape all over the floor, and like it was exactly the aesthetic that we were trying to go for, but then still to work to a point where it again becomes a finished exhibition, and where some pieces of tape are being put away and some pieces could stay, or so I don't know. That's a fun balance that we've been around for the last few weeks, I think. Would you like to add something, Adam?
I would like to add something. First of all, I love. You talked about this yesterday. The this kind of idea of this show breaking the fourth wall like that is really not a way I had thought about it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I was thinking about in my work that I'm sort of I'm thinking about this mark, the evidence of labor, in kind of two different levels, I guess. And I think first and foremost in these objects, they're putting something, they are essentially like, I'm basically making a frame for these objects that come with a story. And to me, that first thing, like each of those objects has a different level of this mark of those who've used them, their use, the mark of their use. And I think about the one that's hanging on the wall, actually. It comes to mind, which I've never, I don't think of myself as someone who makes wall art, so it was really nice to see that stuff up on the wall. It's sort of like really let me think about that object in a different way. And so that's the paint roller from the Wharton Ashford Museum. And it's just an everyday object. Like I own like 8 of those things, but like to know where that comes from, and every splash of paint on that is there, and like the grime from someone's hands. So that's like the first way that that's addressed in this stuff, and every single one of them comes with like a different level of that, but all of them you can see the use that's gone into them, and then to connect it to the exhibitions that it's been related to is really intriguing to me. And then there's also the second layer in this, which is more related to what you're talking about. It's like I made these crates. I didn't put finish on them or anything. They're meant to be used as crates, and they're relatively pristine looking right now. But over time, I imagine them sort of getting the marks of having been. Hopefully, they go somewhere else eventually, and like they ship and they get those marks built up on them as well. And I like the kind of interplay. To me, at first, I was kind of like, I was ready to just like put them on a truck. We were a little more careful than that, but like allowing, in my work, I often try to allow for the mark of them like starting a new life, and then like being used. That's an important part of, to me as a person obsessed with like functional objects, that's just a part of what those objects do. They start to show time and use in a different way. Yeah.
It's actually like the objects within your crates already. Like they're obviously they're like the objects within your crates are obviously like being used already, and then after a while maybe your crate itself will catch up with them, because they're protecting the thing that's inside, but they're like, you know, like they're being worn out after a while, and maybe someone will come by, find them in 20 years or 30 years and will build a crate around those again, right? Like they could kind of turn into the objects that are inside of the crates at the moment.
Well, it's interesting too, because in a way I've paused the aging of the other objects. Like I've frozen those are like not going to no new life is going to be added to those in that way, and now the crate itself is going to be kind of aging in that way.
I think my work is sort of on the opposite end of that spectrum. I was like, the marks are there already, no more marks. Like when I got the crates, it was like there's like footprints all over them, and there's nails sticking out. So a lot of the crates I got were in panels where the family already tried to take a lot of them apart, but then they hammered the nails down. So my first job is to hammer them back up and then hammer them out. And when I think of, material traces, as I'm taking these crates apart, I'm thinking about the people who put them together, whether or not it was a great craftsman or not a great craftsman, because they were just slapping things together. Some of them are 1 inch, some of them are 8 inch, and some of them have nails in between each slat that I have to take out. But at this point, I think they don't make crates like this anymore because they are not good. They actually, the Lum family went to Jingdezhen this summer, and they actually shipped them in really well-packed, double corrugated cardboards on pallets, so they're not thrown around anymore. And so these crates aren't being made, and so I feel like after I've made these vessels, then it's like bubble wrap, a lot of packing peanuts, very careful handling. We're not at white gloves yet, but I feel like it's sort of the opposite, where I'm like, I don't want them to be thrown around. Please don't put a sticker on it. I'm at that point, though.
Can I add one thing? I do think it's interesting, getting back to the way you're talking about the glass cube, because for me, I've made a lot of work that's intended to go in the landscape also, like not site-specific, but things that get set up and taken down. And the way you're talking about this luggage, I love that interplay with, I've often had to have this conversation with people who run galleries or like are curating a show where I'm like, I'll just throw it up against the thing. And they're like, no, sorry, I can't treat an object like that. This kind of like, I have to like find a compromise where it's like, I want a thing to like get some wear and tear, because that's just like what it's intended to do, is exist as with a certain function. And then like the reality of trying to preserve a thing and how those two things can kind of butt up against one another when you work in a certain way. Because you've made a lot of public work, right?
Yeah.
And is that something that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, those like works that are out in the public, they're always like growing in a sense, and some of them were temporary. I made like a replica of a metro station, for example, like in a field over 100 miles away from the nearest city, to challenge this local perception of being far off. So it was like just this like metro light with this M lit up, and an entrance that like two handrails that stuck down into the ground. There just wasn't the stairs to actually enter the hall, but from a distance you would kind of get the feeling like, oh wait, this is an exact replica of one of the big cities, and I could maybe like, I don't know, imagine like it's a suggestion of this tunnel or of this connection. And once I had to put it away, it was full of stickers, full of graffiti, like tags, and there are things that I couldn't come up with somehow, or I wish I was like I already installed those at first. Like they definitely made the piece more realistic, which kind of was the point of the installation. And at the end, I also took all the stickers off, and I still have them like collected in a folder. As the only piece that's like the rest of the thing was actually broken down completely. No, I feel like every day that these works age, they actually start to look better, and they're being used in a... It's funny to make like these, I think like comparing it to theater again, they're really like set pieces. They're not actual objects, but people putting stickers on them kind of make them like interacted with in the same way that people interact with the actual metro station. Or I had a sculpture that resembles a campsite that's 5 stories high, and people were not supposed to camp in it. I didn't have the permits for it, but then breaking the work down again, I found sleeping bags, bottles, even clothes within the structure. I had to repair it a couple of times, and already found like pieces of like clothes from people that were obviously used it as a place to camp in. There were washing lines hanging around this campsite, that kind of high-rise campsite, and I just included the pieces of clothes that I found on the washing lines, so they were like on display. Like kind of, I feel like every work like that's interacted with, it kind of grows, and I try to include the elements that people add to it as a continuation of, well, just like the dance are like a part of the sculptural process. And I'm happy that this use makes them real in a way.
Thank you for, I wanted to kind of build off of the idea of like the stage, or the kind of performance or choreography of mounting an exhibition. At one point while we were installing, as Willem said, we were all kind of saying, it already looks done, like how much more do we do? But it was all like deeply intentional to have this kind of experience that feels like you're behind the wall, then the walls are being framed, then they're slowly evolving into this kind of finished state. And I know that a couple of you were like, we should really be live streaming the whole install, like it's a performance piece. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this kind of work is, one, attractive to people who are in the art, who are artists, and most, almost every art handler I know has an art practice, and how this kind of work inspires kind of adjacent creative production in the studio, and I think, Clinton, your work has a really interesting kind of, you're telling stories about that, and it's like Larry Bell, worked as a framer, and that's why he knows all of those things about that kind of glass, and that's why, there's this kind of direct correlation between the knowledge and skill set and experience that's happening behind the scenes, and then what is kind of being borne out in the studio. Could you start, and maybe all of you address it, and also talk a little bit about how, you mentioned Prada might co-opt Willem's luggage, but your work has been co-opted in a similar way.
Yeah. Okay. I was always kind of fascinated, or it's always interesting when you hear about artists who work for other artists. Especially how like Bryce Martin was Rauschenberg's assistant. Or that Robert Ryman was a security guard, and it's like, or even that Philip Glass was a taxi driver, and or like Louise Lawler like worked at Leo's Castelli, like all these stories where like, and I think you can connect the dots with their practice to like what their work is, what their day job was essentially, and that's definitely. Yeah, it's interesting to me for sure. And so I guess what I got interested in was how, like that transition or that influence, could be more direct, and then like how you would really like treat that influence. Like for instance, like I worked for Chuck Close. For 6 years, and I think it's kind of interesting to think about my practice in relation to like, kind of this like almost, essentially like one of the most like iconic artists, and this like cult of personality around it, and how like I took on a project that was essentially like required me to be invisible, like I'm behind the scenes with the project. Like a lot of people just know like the Instagram avatar, they think of me as like, or they think of art handler as like a team, and of course I've worked collaboratively over the years and stuff, but that's like what I said in the very beginning, how my project required me to like take on these like other roles. So I guess my influence really is just like I continued that kind of service relationship within my practice. So like art handler just is for the people, it's for the community. I'm essentially, it is kind of like an analog to art handling in a way. I'm in the background.
One of the best things I learned from working with Ursula, besides being able to move giant things, which I think is actually like my special skill to be able to move giant things, is labeling, like a labeling system. Because every piece that I made, I actually figured out if I buy these quarter-inch sticky dots from Amazon, like 10,000, a pack of 10,000 stickers. After the studio, I'd go home, I would eat dinner, and I would write A1, A2, A3, A4, B1, B2. I would label all the stickers, I would pre-label them. And so while I was cutting each individual piece, I would stick a sticker on them so I would know exactly what piece goes where. Because each vessel takes 100 or so pieces. If I drop them, I need to know exactly where they go. And so I feel like one of the background things that you don't see is sort of like the labeling and the organization and the archiving.
And the systems.
The systems that are in place just to make something.
Yeah. So I think another thing, just thinking about systems, something that Adam did in his work, he invented a collections management system. And so a way to kind of record the acquisitions, how many objects came from each museum. And, almost every jeweler I've ever met makes their own mounts. And so we have, mounts here, and I think this the kind of like responsiveness and nimbleness and kind of acuity with the material is really kind of a through line in all of these artists' work. I think now that the microphone has told us that it was time, I think we want to open it up to questions. We're really so honored to have all of you here. Thank you for sharing your work. And thank you to the entire kind of production crew that made this performance of this exhibition happen. It really took such an immense kind of crew of thinkers and makers and craftsmen that you're not even seeing all of them. So thank you to everybody.